It's common knowledge. A keyboard mouse is better than a controller. But, is it really that simple? Absolutely not. I recently switched from playing console for years and years and years, because at the time in my life, when I switched from PC gaming to console, that was a bit of an upgrade because my dad's computer was aging, we didn't have a lot of money, so an Xbox 360 was a good get, and so I spent the last 10 years playing on console. Switching back to mouse and keyboard, I do find myself occasionally playing like a controller user. And this sounds condescending or insulting, it sounds elitist, but no, this video has a very, very uplifting message and I really hope you sit through it. I sometimes still play like I have a controller. I have the limitations of the analog sticks on a controller. Sometimes I try to move my character's feet to aim my gun, which is a very important thing to do on console because most FPS games don't activate aim assist rotation at all unless the person is actively moving. And your left stick will allow you to move millimeter by millimeter, while your right stick is doing more general aiming towards the target your left stick can be correcting. This is not as important on mouse and keyboard. While it's good to stay moving in a gunfight, WASD is not really going to help you aim. A PC player can stand completely still and just, move their mouse without touching their keyboard and click on targets. That's just not as feasible for a console player or controller user, especially if they rely a little bit on aim assist, which in my opinion, there's no shame in relying on aim assist, especially if you're going up against somebody with a mouse and keyboard, because precision-wise, they're going to outgame you. But that's okay, because what really matters is mastery, and what really matters is playstyle. And this isn't just some hokey hallmark nonsense. I really think that playstyle is the most important, and the reason is I still find myself playing like I have a controller and not a mouse and keyboard. A mouse and keyboard's able to turn and look around a lot faster, but isn't as good at tracking in close range, and sometimes I get into engagements that are just not optimal for a mouse and keyboard. Tracking a target in close range on mouse and keyboard is far from impossible, but it's a little bit more difficult than a controller. A controller user moving their left and right stick in tandem, getting a little bit of aim assist rotation and slowdown, it just feels a lot better to do than trying to move my mouse across my mouse pad to 180 somebody who's closing in behind me, or somebody who's doing a sort of C formation around me, sort of walking a half circle around me. Keeping my engagements more at a distance and learning that I can turn on people a lot faster than they might expect, especially if they only usually play against controller users, is just something I need to do more often. Sometimes I'll start getting shot and I'll just run around the corner, or I'll just sort of accept death when I don't need to be. I could probably turn around and get shots on that person. I could probably jump to the left, turn around, and take care of that person. I run at a 950 DPI with a low sensitivity. It works really well for me. I could probably do that and master that, but that's not as easy on a controller. See, on a controller, when you turn up your sensitivity, you're trading control for speed, whereas a mouse can be much faster than an analog stick and still have more control and a wider range of motion. Making little millimeter adjustments with a mouse, if you're doing a sort of hybrid palm grip on your mouse and you're sort of, kind of pressing down with your fingers and pinching the sides and doing those little millimeter adjustments, a controller user can't do those things. So I personally found that interesting. Playing on controller all these years has sort of geared my playstyle and my game sense to be a little bit more methodical. I play with a little bit more of a slow sensitivity because I want to be able to control my recoil and my aim without worrying about overshooting or undershooting or correcting awkwardly. Using your left stick to aim on a controller is very, very important, whereas using WASD is simply not on a keyboard. What everybody should do if they want to do better at FPS games, myself included, is play against more bots, play more single player games, and find out what engagements stress you out. At what distance does a recruit bot become harder for you to hit? Is it far away? Is it close up? At what point is it hard to, check corners in a room? Is it hard to, do a good, decent jump shot or turn on an opponent? You should do this in low stress environments, playing campaign missions or against bots on recruit difficulty, because it's so low stress, the first thing that jumps out at you when something's frustrating is going to really stand out. Because you think, well, this is a recruit bot, how did I just die? And you think, well, actually, I over-aimed. Or when I came out of sprint, my centering was so bad I was aiming at his stomach instead of his upper chest. I tried to quickscope and it went right over his shoulder. Maybe my ability to do that isn't very good. And it doesn't matter if you have an elite controller, a standard controller, a mouse and keyboard that cost you $15, or a mouse and keyboard that cost you $200. It doesn't fucking matter. If you're playing on a PS4 or an Xbox One and you get 60 FPS, you have a standard controller with no paddles, no control freaks on the analog sticks, you are stock default, my man. What's going to matter is how much you practice and how comfortable you're willing to become until certain things are second nature. Then you instinctually avoid engagements that aren't optimal and you go for the engagements that are. If you're a controller player with a higher sensitivity, maybe you really don't want to have long-range engagements against small targets unless you're using a sniper rifle, so don't start shooting at somebody you're not comfortable at killing. Avoid them entirely. They might have a sniper rifle, they might be better at that engagement than you. If you're not comfortable, you could practice it, but you could also just avoid it and control the engagement to where you are comfortable. Maybe with your higher sensitivity and your playstyle and your preferred weapon, it's better to fight in closer ranges. If you're a mouse and keyboard player, you play at like 400 DPI with a sort of lower sensitivity, you might be laser beam accurate at mid to long range, but the moment somebody closes into your room or your building, it might be very, very hard to track them in close range, especially if they slide up to you with a shotgun or they jump shot a sort of half circle around you. That formation is really good against a low sensitivity player because they simply can't adjust or control. So on the topic of controlling, you need to be controlling your engagements all the time, and you do it subconsciously. This is what I notice. I don't think to myself, I'm going to play like a controller user, but I watch my gameplay back and clearly my brain switched to my most recent memories. My most recent memories are playing on controller, so sometimes my brain defaults to that playstyle. Controlling your engagements and playing where you're comfortable isn't something you should be actively thinking about all of the time, although it might be a good idea to help bring your focus in to try to actively think about it. But for the most part, it's going to happen on autopilot if you train that part of your brain. Here's my hot take. If there was a PC player that wanted to 1v1 a console player, and the console player has a default controller, standard TV setup, and just, is playing at 60 FPS, it's just all standard, bog standard, right out of the box console gameplay. And the PC player has a $200 keyboard and mouse, has a $500 240Hz 1440p monitor, and a computer that can pump out those frames. That PC player would have a massive technical advantage. They're going to have lower input lag, smoother gameplay, they're going to have more precise gameplay. They are in the optimal state there. My hot take is that the person that wins is the person who's practiced more. The person that knows their favorite weapon inside and out. The person that knows the map inside and out. The person that can gauge their playstyle for what their controller's good at. If you're going up against that PC player, but your skill set is locking down a building, and you're able to win by, seriously, just camping in and around a single building, a win in that case is a win. Now, I'm not saying you should be that campy and that scummy in a 1v1, but I am saying that what really matters is your playstyle, your level of comfortability, and your amount of practice. My friends and I got into a domination game when Modern Warfare first came out against an entire team of PC players. They were trash talking us because all of our things said Xbox, all of their things said PC, so they were trash talking us. Match of domination starts on Grozny Raid. We start kicking their ass. We played to win. We did better callouts. We won more gunfights. They bitched about our aim assist, they bitched about lag, and then left. And I'm here to tell you the connection in that lobby was fine. While I do think I'm getting a lot better at keyboard and mouse gameplay, I do have to realize that my playstyle is more important than the devices that I'm using. And sometimes I still play as if I don't have a keyboard and mouse. I play under controller limitations. I play in a way that would work really well with my Xbox Elite controller, but is sort of unoptimal and kind of clunky to do with a keyboard and mouse. So go into a low stress environment, whether with a friend, with some bots, in a campaign, whatever it might be, go into a low stress environment and find out what annoys you. Kill enemies normally, try to drop shot them, try to quick scope them, try to blast them with a shotgun in close range, try to check corners, try to do a throwing knife throw, and just really see where your weaknesses are. And this goes for any video game you play. When you find something that annoys you, learn how to do the best you can with it, and then sort of gauge your playstyle so you don't have to deal with it all the time. You want to be able to deal with it if it happens, but you also want to be able to avoid it. Like if you're learning how to drive, it's important to know how to deal with your car going off the road. You never want your car to go off the road, but if it starts, it's good to know what to do. The same goes for gun safety. If you carry a gun in public, you want to be able to know what is a gun situation, what isn't a gun situation, and how to handle yourself under high stress, situations. So practice the things you're bad at and then sort of avoid them when you're trying to win. When you're trying to play optimally, don't make the mistake of falling into the area that you're at your weakest, where your mouse and keyboard just doesn't work very well, or your controller just doesn't work very well. I'll end this video with a quick story. When I used to play FPS games downstairs, I'd hang out with my dad and I'd play video games on a much bigger screen than I'm used to. I had trouble taking out distant enemies, and that's just because I was used to playing on a 30-inch screen, and going downstairs to our 55-inch screen felt very, very awkward. Distant enemies felt very, very small. So while normally I'd use a holographic sight or a red dot sight, something 1 or 1.5 times, when I would play downstairs, I saw a big improvement in my gameplay by using hybrid sights or optics or whatever the shooter had, whatever the game in question had. I would try to always use a higher zoom optic to sort of counteract the disadvantages of playing on a much larger screen from much farther away. You shouldn't bitch and complain about your limitations. You should really learn how to work around them if at all possible. Then later, if you're able to overcome them through device purchases or platform changing, that's great. But your first priority should be to improve yourself, not your setup. See you when I see you. Goodbye.
I had 65. Fuck!